All right, here we go. So 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the podcast. Very excited to have as my guest today, Dr. Fleet Maull. Fleet, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Guy. Great to see you.
Awesome. So Fleet is the founder and CEO of Heart Mind Institute, also Windhorse Seminars and Consulting, as well as a senior partner and principal in New Line Consulting. He is an IMTA certified professional mindfulness teacher and an Acharya, which is a senior meditation teacher in the Tibetan tradition, as well as a roshi in the international Zen peacemaker community. While serving 14 years in a federal prison on drug charges, Fleet co-founded the first inside prison hospice program anywhere in the world and launched 2 national movements, the Prison Hospice Movement through the National Prison Hospice Association and the Prison Dharma Mindfulness Movement through the Prison Dharma Network and Prison Mindfulness Institute. Fleet has written many articles and has given numerous interviews on a variety of mindfulness and leadership-related topics. He's the author of Radical Responsibility, How to Move Beyond Blame, Fearlessly Live Your Highest Purpose, and Become an Unstoppable Force for Good. Fleet, welcome to the podcast.
Again, thanks for having me, Guy.
Incredible background. Before we get going here, share with the listeners where you're from originally and where you are currently.
Well, I grew up in the Midwest, actually in St. Louis, kind of middle-class Roman Catholic upbringing in the 1950s, came of age in the 60s, went through the countercultural revolution thing, full participant in that. Today I live in Western Massachusetts with my wife, Sophie, and we live about 2 hours west of Boston in the Connecticut River Valley in a little New England town, really quiet little bucolic village.
Nice, nice. So, I mean, there's a lot to talk about. I mean, I know you have a lot going with Heart Mind Institute and different summits. We're going to focus on one summit in particular, the Psychedelic-Assisted Therapy Summit. But give our listeners kind of a brief synopsis. First of all, how did this all start for you? And then we'll get into Heart Mind Institute and the different summits.
Sure. I'll try to do that really briefly. First of all, I think I was born a seeker. All throughout my early life, I was trying to understand the nature of mind, nature of reality, a natural kind of spiritual seeker. As I mentioned before, I went through headlong into the whole countercultural revolution of the 60s and 70s, and was caught up in all the drug, sex, and rock and roll and all that. But also there was this true line of being a seeker, and before I could untangle all that, I earned my way into a federal prison sentence, a mandatory minimum drug sentence. I spent 14 years in a federal prison. But along the way, I'd also done a 3-year clinical training in contemplative psychotherapy and integration of Buddhist and Western psychology. I've been trained as a Buddhist teacher for 10 years. So I obviously was compartmentalizing my life in lots of ways. But anyway, by the time I landed in prison, I had a lot of training and a lot of skills. And that was a huge wake-up call. My son was 9 years old at the time. I had to face the reality of what I'd done to him and all the incredible selfish decisions I'd been making for so long. And so I just became radically focused on getting all the negativity out of my life, taking all the good I'd received and doing something positive with it, living a better legacy for my son than just his dad went to prison or died in prison. I had no surety I'd survive my time. So that really became my monastery, my ashram time, and I was focused on really engaged in the community. I was teaching school. I started the first hospice program anywhere in any prison in the world,
wow,
as far as we know. And as you mentioned in my bio, these 2 national movements came out of that work, and I've been out of prison since 1999, so about 25 years. And so I've been very involved in studying and practicing mindfulness across many traditions for over 50 years now. I've been studying neuroscience for a long time, studying psychology for a long time. I have a PhD in psychology, and I've been very involved in executive coaching, business consulting. I've been a seminar workshop leader leading transformational workshops around the world before the pandemic. I was basically a road warrior doing that. But at some point, I decided to try to move that work online. And then when the pandemic hit, it really took off, and that was Heart Mind Institute. And so we have a lot of courses online, and we do a lot of summits. And it's really the integration It's really a culmination of all this work I've been doing for the last 50 years or longer, and it's the integration of uh, ancestral wisdom, contemplative wisdom, East and West, indigenous wisdom, appropriately related with sacred reciprocity, and the integration of all that with current science, current neuroscience, current psychology, positive neuroplasticity, those things. So our work is all about helping people optimize their well-being, their happiness, quality of their relationships, their career success, their professional success, just optimizing their lives altogether. And so we have summits on resilience, we have summits on rewiring your brain. We have a lot of courses that are around the same kind of content. I have my Radical Responsibility book and model, which is about the power of choice and the power of embracing really radical personal responsibility and personal accountability for the choices you're making in life and what you're creating for yourself with those choices, and how that's not a burden, but really a doorway into incredible personal power and freedom. And so that's kind of the work, and we offer it in a lot of different iterations. But basically, we also have a big focus on healing trauma and post-traumatic growth, and we're really, we're fairly cutting edge around all of this. And our summits include really the leading speakers worldwide in healing trauma, in positive neuroplasticity, positive psychology, um, um, rewiring your brain to optimize your life. All of these things are really the leading clinicians and neuroscientists in the world are on our summits.
And for those who maybe aren't really sure, a summit is what?
Yeah, well, it's a kind of conference, an online conference, and there's different models for summits. Our summit is sometimes called the free summit model. We do summits could be anywhere. Commonly, they're 6 days, but we do some that are 3 days, 5 days. We've done some as many as 9 or 10 days,
Mm-hmm.
and they're free. And so we enroll anywhere from 30 to 80,000 in the initial running of our summits. And some of our summits with the replays that we run have enrolled like 250,000 people by now in a particular
Wow.
summit. Yeah. And they enroll for free, and they have, depending on the summit, they either have 24 hours or 48 hours access to each day's presentations. And there's
Okay.
usually 6, 7, or 8 presentations a day, and they all become available at the same time. So you can just pick and choose what you want to watch.
Right.
But people who would like to take longer with it or come back to it are interested then in purchasing the what we call the lifetime access upgrade that includes all the content of that summit plus a lot of bonuses, often other summits. Uh, and that's how we monetize it, so to speak. And we're able for it to be profitable, and then put profit back into continue to grow and offer more summits. But this way, we're able to reach. We've reached probably about in the last 4 years, we've reached over a million, probably 1,200,000 people with our summits now, uh, all around the world. And the majority probably in North America and Europe, but we have people in almost every country in the world coming to our summits, and people who wouldn't otherwise be able to access this material. And then a small percentage of people decide to purchase the upgrade and invest in themselves and invest with us, and that allows us to keep doing it. So that's kind of the way the model works.
So today we're going to focus in a sense on one of the summits that's coming up, and I'm just looking at the website here. It's all new third annual Psychedelic-Assisted Therapy Global Summit, which is going from October 8th to the 14th in 2024. Now, before we talk about the summit specifically, talk a little bit about, if you don't mind, as kind of an entree, about the psychedelics and the role of psychedelics and how you became. You talked about your experience in the 60s. I'm
Exactly.
assuming there's some connection there, but I don't know. But
Well,
more,
there is a strong connection there. I was very involved in with psychedelics in the 60s and early um, 70s, actually, well, throughout the 70s. Actually, in my sophomore year of high school in 1966, I discovered Buddhism, cannabis, and LSD all in the same summer. And it kind of went on from there. But and like a lot of us back in that era, I was involved with psychedelics recreationally, partying, some of that craziness, but also spiritually, a lot of things out in nature. Um, and then and also as a way to just really explore consciousness. And then I lived in South America for quite a long time, and I was very involved in the plant medicine world down there, primarily what's known as Wakama or San Pedro, which is has it contains peyote, but it's a different cactus than the cactus than the peyote cactus here in the U.S.
Mhm.
and Mexico and so forth. But it's they both have mescaline, and so I was very involved in that for a long time, ceremonially and studying with teachers and so forth. So, so then when when I earned my way into that federal prison system, all my drug use stopped, and in fact, it stopped several years before that, and uh, and then coming out, I had no interest in being involved in drugs, and also was on supervision anyway for a long time, so I needed to stay drug free. But I had no interest in getting involved in drugs again. But I started over time reading about this emergence of what's been called a psychedelic renaissance,
Mhm.
and I was a little skeptical about it, especially seeing a lot of this stuff about shamanism in Peru and the kind of ayahuasca tourism that's going on, and because I lived in these countries and I know what the real deal is, and I thought some of this looks a little like maybe made up, and some of it, but I was still open-minded, so I kept following it. But then I started to see what was going on with the emergence of psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, and I got very interested because I started seeing some of the research where these therapies were having a profound healing impact for people suffering from very difficult to treat mental health challenges, a severe depression, anxiety disorders, panic disorders, addictions, PTSD, especially veterans with PTSD and so forth.
Mhm.
So I got very interested in this because I've always been profoundly interested in healing. I'm trained as a psychotherapist. I never went that direction. I became more involved in consulting and coaching. I had a master's degree, a deep clinical training program, and then I got my PhD in psychology. So I've just always been very interested in that world. So I kept doing the research. I said, well, I think we should do a summit in this area. And so we did our first one in 2022. And along the way, over this now 3 years, I've really gotten to know all the major players in the field. I knew some of them already through other connections, but I've really, we had Bessel van Arkel on our summits, quite a few of our summits, because he's one of the leading trauma therapists in the world.
Right.
And his book, The Body Keeps the Score, is like this amazing phenomena. It's been on the top of the nonfiction bestseller
Yeah.
list for like 300 weeks. But he's an amazing clinician and theorist and practitioner. And so, but he's also gotten involved in psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. So he's one example of some people I already knew from other fields who are also involved in this. But then I got to know a lot of new people. And so, and on our summits, we've had really almost all the leading researchers, clinicians, real pioneers of the field, people like Stan Groff, Paul Stamets, Andrew Weil, Deepak Chopra, and researchers like Robin Carhart Harris and
Well,
Rosalind Watts and Matthew Johnson and really you name it. We're almost all the major influencers, so-called movers and shakers in this emerging field of psychedelic assisted therapy and medicine have been on our summits, and so we're really involved in trying to build. We're committed to building this field. And we feel like we're partnering with people in this field to really build this field in a good way. Back in the 60s, a lot of us had this idea if we could just get everybody to drop LSD, the world would change and everything would be great. Didn't quite work out that way. And then, of course, there was a huge suppression and things were made illegal. But there's a new chance now. And in doing my research, I saw that there are so many nonprofit organizations out there and networks of people trying to do it right this time. Really
yeah.
trying to steward this movement so we don't get the huge backlash that we got last time, so that we take care of people, so we reduce the harm and really optimize the benefit of these medicines. And so, I'm really encouraged by that. But we really want to participate in that because there's a lot of risks. These medicines are very powerful. Um, there's a little bit of a wild west right now
Hmm.
with the psychedelic renaissance. There's the whole kind of in terms of psychedelic assisted therapies, the only one that's legal currently is ketamine. The others are happening within clinical trials, and the FDA has approved clinical trials to start again quite a while ago, some maybe 10 years ago. So there are clinical trials, legitimate clinical trials going on with MDMA, with psilocybin, with LSD, with DMT, with many psychedelic medicines, mescaline, and so forth. And but none of them have been made legal for the public for therapy yet. We thought MDMA might get rescheduled this August, but the FDA decided not to. I think it's inevitable. It's probably just going to delay it a year, perhaps, or hopefully less. Australia did uh, uh, approve both the use of the therapeutic use by physicians as part of therapy, um, both MDMA and psilocybin earlier this year. So I think it's inevitable that some of these medicines will be rescheduled by the FDA and the DEA for use by therapists in the context of psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy. And but even still, it's real. The training is so important as we roll this out. There are so many issues. How to roll this out in a way that it's safe, that
Hmm.
the practitioners are well trained, that the consumer is well educated of what they're getting into, that and then how to roll it out in an equitable way. Because the way it's being done in the clinical trials is really expensive. If that would be the model, only the elite could afford it, right?
Right.
So we have to find new models of how this is going to roll out and be available in an equitable way for everyone who could benefit from it. And there's a lot of people, brilliant people working on this, right? So there's a lot of possibilities, and it's an exciting emerging field that has so much promise for healing so much human suffering. But it's got to be stewarded really well, and the science has got to be good, and the training's got to be good, and good ethical principles, and honoring the issues around inclusion and diversity, and with the plant medicines and the indigenous communities, honoring sacred reciprocity and so forth. So we're working really hard with our colleagues in the field to at least participate, play some small role in helping steward this field forward in the most beneficial way.
Let me remind everyone I'm speaking with Dr. Fleet Maull. We're talking specifically, Dr. Fleet Maull of the Heart Mind Institute, and we're talking specifically about his summit, Psychedelic Assisted Therapy Global Summit, starting October 8th and going through the 14th. So let's dial in here and talk a little bit more specifically about this summit. Who's it for?
Hmm. Yeah, well, it's for everyone in a sense, but I would say at the same time, the primary audience is probably mental health professionals.
Okay.
Now, the first year we had a huge enrollment. I think it was just perfect timing, and we had a huge enrollment the first year, and it was probably 60% lay people, right? The general audience. There's a huge interest in this. Last year, I think it was maybe flipped. Maybe it was 60% mental health professionals, 40% lay audience. I expect it'll be something similar this year. Um, I think there's still a growing interest among the public in this, but I think
Mhm.
that at least the people we're reaching with our networks and our lists and our affiliates and so forth among the lay public, I think we may have met their needs for information for a while, but I think we'll continue to enroll because the public has a great interest in this, and many people in the public don't even know about it yet, and many people
Right.
who are suffering and not really benefiting from the existing treatments for depression, anxiety, and so forth. Some of those treatments, the SRIs, and some benefit some people, but they don't benefit a lot. And these new medicines offer great promise. These new therapies offer great promise. So I think we'll have a growing audience there. But we really do focus on the mental health professionals, the clinicians. And in fact, we're building what we're calling the Psychedelic Practitioners Academy, and that's an annual subscription membership program where people who have subscribed to that membership at a very low cost will have access to all of our summits,
Oh,
ongoing, all that content, plus courses. We already have one course that we built on psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy with Dr. Ron Siegel. We're building another one right now with Sonny Strasberg, an amazing practitioner integrating ketamine assisted therapy with internal family systems and archetypal psychology. We're building a course with her around what she calls her theodelic approach, and we're going to be building more courses. Um, and so the members of the Psychedelic Practitioners Academy will have ongoing access to all that. They'll get their CEs covered. They won't have to pay extra for their CEs, and we all of our summit and courses all have American Psychological Association CEs available, and then we'll be doing other things as we build out that community. We'll probably have some kind of free live workshop once a week with leading clinicians. We're eventually going to build in a practice management platform within it and so forth. So we're really looking to build a home for psychedelic uh, medicine, psychedelic therapy practitioners where they know they'll get the cutting edge education, continuing education,
Hmm.
and all the resources and then have a community of peers that they can network with and so forth. So we're building that very much. But so I think the summit is such that, and we structured it such that they will be of interest to anyone who's interested in this field, and there will be very much of particular interest to mental health professionals, and I think really in some ways necessary interest. Like this is one way to really stay abreast because
Yeah.
we're really addressing the latest research, the latest findings. Our interviews are with all the people currently who are most influential in this emerging field.
Okay. So again, looking at the website, there are a number of people who I am familiar with and I've interviewed. Um, and actually, James Fadiman is on there, who I was a student of his at Institute of Transpersonal Psychology. I was in his class, amazing teacher. But getting more specific, Fleet, putting myself in the shoes of someone who's going to attend this conference, and there are a lot of speakers, but let's maybe choose one or two uh, streams of what are they going to learn more specifically beyond just psychedelics and psychedelics. What are some specific uh, topics that they're going to possibly
Yeah.
learn?
So day one focuses on indigenous Eastern and Western modes of knowing and really the nature of consciousness, mind, spirit. So it kind of sets a context. And
Right.
because in terms of the world of psychedelics, we really are drawing on all of those, right? And it's really important to honor the indigenous communities that have been stewarding these medicines for thousands of years, right? And uh, and so we'll have some amazing speakers, Chiritan, Dr. Joe Tafur, Anya Lozenya-Velder, some real amazing speakers who are involved in the plant medicine world and also who can speak to these questions about the nature of mind and consciousness. We've had people like Deepak Chopra and Dan Siegel and many others on day one in the past. So that's day one. And then day two is really all about the research. It's about the research. It's about where we are with the possibility of rescheduling some of these medicines for
Mhm.
prescription for therapeutic use and so forth. So we have Rick Doblin from MAPS, who's been leading the charge to get the clinical trials started again. He
Right.
tried to prevent MDMA from being criminalized way back in the 70s. He wasn't successful at that, but started the organization MAPS. They do their big psychedelic science in-person conference each year. It was a huge phenomenon last year in Denver. And so he's really one of the leading drivers in the efforts to have psychedelic medicines rescheduled for therapeutic use. And his organization will have Matthew Johnson, again, one of the leading current researchers. Rick Strassman, who wrote the book The Spirit Molecule, about his work and research into DMT. Cassandra Beaton from UC San Diego and many others, Catherine McLean and so forth. So that's really all about the research, and be really getting into the nuts and bolts. What do we know, and what are the directions really needed for further research? Because
Mhm.
obviously the FDA is saying more research is going to be needed before they're going to approve MDMA for rescheduling, but also we don't really understand the therapy the we don't fully understand the neurobiological therapeutic mechanisms of these drugs yet. We have ideas, but we don't necessarily, we know they're working. We know they're
Mhm.
having a huge impact. We don't know exactly how. And it's also hard to, dial that in because we may learn more about the actual neurobiological mechanisms for increased neuroplasticity or increased change, what have you. Uh, but then there's the whole phenomenon of set and setting and the combination of the medicine with the psychotherapy and the valid role of a placebo effect in all of this. So it's a very complex thing, and there's a lot of research that needs to be done. There's a lot of fabulous research happening, and it's just I think really important to keep moving that research forward, keep the field abreast of it, so we know what we know. This is a field where there's a lot of enthusiasm, and sometimes the enthusiasm and the hype can get ahead of the research, and
Mhm.
so. We need to make sure that we're grounding this in good science. So that's what day two is all about.
Mhm.
Day three is getting into very specific therapeutic applications. So the potential for these medicines to work with people suffering from various kinds of trauma, and as well as from PTSD and or addictions or specific types of addictions or anxiety disorders and so forth. So that day really focuses on the particular therapeutic applications and talking about some of the protocols involved, some of the dosing and so forth for
Mhm.
safe delivery of these medicines. And then we have a day focused on the real importance of preparation and integration. The preparation of a client going into a session and the integration of the experience afterwards, which are both absolutely critical to
Mhm.
optimizing the benefit and reducing any potential risk or harm for that. Then we have a day focused on the evolving standards and ethics, the best practices both for the delivery of psychedelic medicine and the training of clinicians. So a big focus there on best practices and ethics and so forth. And again, we have like Ingmar Gorman from Fluence, one of the leading training organizations, and we've had some of the leaders from CIIS and Europa who offer so two of the institutions offering professional certificate, postgraduate professional certificate programs and so forth.
In
And then finally,
psychedelics?
in psychedelic medicines, yeah.
Oh, wow. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, CIS, the California Institute of Integral Studies, has a postgraduate professional certificate program for psychedelic practitioners. So does Naropa
Interesting.
University. Andrew Wiles Center at the University of Arizona is developing one specifically for physicians. And then
Hmm.
Fluence is a non-academic but training organization that's also certifying psychedelic practitioners, right?
Now,
And
let me
so
pause you right there. So, in terms of, again, I'm putting myself in the shoes of a participant to the summit. What is it, how? What are the courses like? What does it take to become um, ethically competent to administer psychedelics as a therapist? What is this, a year-long course? What is it? What might it take?
I think for me, I think it's minimally a year-long course. People have different views about this, and of course, it
Right.
depends on um, the clinician's background. You know, licensed therapists, if they're master's level licensed therapists, like masters in family counseling or something like that. So there's a lot of practitioners that have that level, and then there's your clinical psychologist and your PhD clinical psychologist, and then there are social workers who are licensed social workers who could practice therapy, and so forth, the psychiatrists and so forth, and they all have different training,
Right.
and they may have more or less training in the actual doing of therapy. And they may have more or less experience in actually being in therapy. You know, they may have
Hmm.
done more or less of their own personal work, right?
Right.
They may have greater or lesser understanding of the dynamics of transference and countertransference and so forth. Now, assuming that most licensed professionals at least have a good body of the things that I just mentioned, then what do we need to add to that? But we also need to keep in mind that um, uh, in practicing psychedelic assisted therapy, now there are different ones. You know, ketamine is very short acting. Psilocybin involves 6 to 8 hour sessions, right? And so what skill set is involved in being able to not only prepare someone but sit with someone for 6 or 8 hours and then do the integration work following, right? And
Yeah.
it's really about how do you really hold a safe space. These medicines are very powerful. And so all the dynamics that are there in traditional psychotherapy, where there are risks of where things could go awry if the practitioner is not properly prepared, not fully aware, not fully present, not aware of some of how their own dynamics might get in the way, all that gets exacerbated with these psychedelic medicines, right?
Hmm.
So I think psychedelic practitioners really need to study the medicines. They need to understand something about the pharmacology involved, about the effects. Uh, I think they need actual experience in sitting with people who are having psychedelic experiences. Now, some programs are using intensive breath work because things like holotropic breath work in many cases, very strongly mimic actual psychedelic experiences.
Hmm.
And so without having to involve psychedelic medicines, they can allow therapists in training to have the experience of being with people who are having these kinds of experiences through breath work as opposed to actually medicines, right?
Interesting.
But there are opportunities in the trials and other ways for people to have these experiences. One of the open questions out there is, do clinicians who practice psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy need to have had experience with psychedelics themselves, especially the ones they're using in their practice? I would say the majority of people I've interviewed say yes, they need to. There are a few that think maybe it's an open question. Some think maybe it's an open question, but I think the consensus view out there is that they need to have their own experience, right? I mean, ideally,
You would
uh,
think.
it seems like a no-brainer, but and I don't mean to be critical, but there are a lot of mental health professionals who provide mental health services in one way or another who have not done a lot of personal work,
Right,
right?
right.
So, and they may be quite competent at referring people and doing things and, getting people to a psychiatrist for prescription medicine and they need that. But, I think in this work, it's really important that the therapist has done their own work and both, uh, certainly even without psychedelics, that they've done some of their own personal evolution, therapeutic, psychological work.
Yeah.
And so they have greater insight into themselves and they know who's showing up there to support the patient. And they have those levels of self-awareness, that kind of training. And but then personally, I think probably it's good for them to have had experience with these psychedelic medicines. And of course, it's always important for clinicians to have a supervisory relationship with another clinician, right? So I think all these things are really quite important. So I think, in terms of the training, it's not something that a current licensed practitioner should think about doing a weekend workshop and then doing it. Whether it's 6 months, whether it's a year, I don't know. I think it's could be somewhere in between 6 months to a year of a good, solid training program, but then
Right.
ongoing continuing education, staying current with the field, and continuing to do their own work.
Okay.
Because the main thing is bringing psychedelic medicines into the therapeutic context. For me, it raises the bar for everything, right?
Hmm.
Because these are powerful medicines, and they can really accelerate and accentuate the healing potentials, but there could also be an exacerbation of risk or harm if not held properly.
This summit sounds incredible, but it also sounds very well put together. It sounds like you thought of uh, everything. In other words, what to present and how to approach it. I mean, it's very impressive. As we close out here, Fleet, how do people learn about this?
Well, you can just go to the website, the landing page. You can go to heartmind.co/trauma, heartmind.co/trauma, and that'll take you to the registration page for the
Okay.
Psychedelic Assisted Therapy Summit.
Okay.
And you can always reach out to us at heartmind.co, and I believe probably in the show notes you'll for this episode you'll have the links and so forth. But there's a
Definitely.
full registration page. We are registering now. It's open for registration now. There's already I think about 15,000 people registered already, and so we're actively registering, and uh, yeah, so people can go right to the page and read all about it. You'll see all the speakers, you'll see the schedule, you'll see everything that's going to happen. You can read all about all the information's there. And you'll also have the opportunity to learn about if someone's interested. Again, it's a completely free summit, and you can participate in it, having 48 hours each day's presentations between October 8th and 14th. And if you wanted to retain this as a resource, you'll be able to purchase lifetime access for amazingly low cost. And then there will also be the option of joining the Psychedelic Practitioners Academy, which will give you
That
all that
sounds
access and
interesting as
more.
well.
Mhm.
All right. Well, again, we'll have this linked up here at the show notes page at the traumatherapistpodcast.com. Fleet, awesome, man. So exciting. And looking forward to getting this out there. Appreciate you being here.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to speak to your audience. I know your audience are primarily trauma therapists, and this is such just an area of passion for me. And all of the work that we do is trauma informed. I'm very involved in the public safety criminal justice space through our nonprofit, and we've been studying trauma and how to really deliver trauma informed care and trauma-informed interventions and programs with populations and individuals that have been placed at risk, that have been marginalized and under-resourced and so forth. So I know I love your community. I'm speaking to your audience. You are the people involved in this kind of trauma healing, trauma work, I think are some of the most amazing human beings on the planet. And I think you'll find this summit fascinating because that's really what this summit is all about in the context of the potential that these psychedelic medicines have for healing trauma.
I appreciate it. All right, sir, we'll be in touch. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Guy.